Hi, I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
And you're listening to the ITPro Podcast, where this week we're taking a hard look at hardware.
The COVID-19 pandemic has turned the spotlight on the devices we use for work, from those of us trying to find room for a MacBook on the kitchen table, to others whose home workstations resemble the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. But what do our device preferences say about us? And how much impact do they really have on our ability to work effectively? So, Adam, what does your setup look like? Because, I think that mine is fancy, yours is, fancy.
So my usual setup, you are entirely correct, is not very fancy, but certainly on the fancier end of the scale. I have two 24-inch monitors next to each other, one portrait and one in landscape, and I have them both connected to a custom-built £2,000 gaming PC, which is my kind of primary workstation, complete with fancy mouse with about 1 million buttons and a keyboard, which unfortunately does light up, which I'm not actually the biggest fan of, but the key action is really nice, and it's really nice and low profile. And I got myself, towards the start of lockdown, a nice comfortable, swivelly leather office chair, which I believe I may have mentioned on this very podcast. Now, that's my usual setup, but I am actually in the process of moving flats. So that is all, for the most part, boxed up and packed away. So for the last month or so, I have been using my trusty old Huawei MateBook X Pro from about 2018. And while I dearly love this laptop, it is a bit of a struggle going from two big screens to one relatively small screen.
And does Google Docs work okay on your normal PC? I'm not sure that it's quite powerful enough to handle what we use on a day-to-day basis.
I mean, it puts some strain on it, I will grant you, but no, the big monster rig is generally capable of keeping up with what I need it to. Although, in fairness, it does come in very handy for doing stuff like video editing and audio editing. In fact, if I ever need to do any tinkering with this podcast.
My setup is slightly less flash than yours. So currently, to record this podcast, I have my MacBook Pro balanced atop two dictionaries, one Spanish, one French. And my podcast stand today is the Dice Man, the Book of Dave, and Catch 22. So, a nice kind of mix of analog and digital, slimline digital going on here. And it's funny, actually, I had to speak to the doctor back along, and they asked me what my IT setup was, which has got to be the first time a doctor has ever asked me that, when I was kind of like, oh, my back hurts a bit. And they were like, oh, yeah, you're not one of those people who's balancing your laptop on a knee or whatever. I said, no, because while this may be my podcasting setup, my normal setup is an iMac on a desk that could do with being a bit deeper, but I've got a nice Bluetooth keyboard and a trackpad, or Magic Pad, whatever fancy name Apple has given it, rather than a mouse, which works quite well for me. So infinitely less fancy than yours, but I'm definitely better off than a lot of people who were kind of flung into lockdown with nothing to balance their laptops on or whatever, which I credit with the fact that I used to work from home a lot before lockdown and for many years.
So you were doing homeworking before it was cool? I
was. Well, I was self-employed for a bit, and then Dennis, which is the company that owns ITPro, has always encouraged a level of homeworking. And being a journalist, we travel around to conferences historically, less so currently. So kind of having some sort of setup for that has been sort of my situation for over 10 years, really.
So we've got fairly established homeworking setups, but what do we think the reality of, device use and device ownership is for most workers? Because I would wager that most UK workers do not have a, big meaty gaming PC and a wall of monitors at home.
Yeah, so I think that you're right. I think that for most people, it's probably at best a laptop. Maybe if you're lucky, you might have a connector to an external screen if you have one of those, and maybe a mouse. If you are lucky, it might be a Bluetooth mouse. I used to use one of them quite a lot while we were going to conferences and while I was traveling, although it just became another piece of kit that actually just took up room. So that's been in my drawer of my desk for a while. I think it probably depends on your job, though. Like, if you are somebody who is in the tech industry from the point of view, like if you're a developer or a coder or something like that, then there's a great possibility that you had something that is nice at home, like already, to use.
Developers are much more likely to own their own, high-end MacBooks or indeed, gaming PCs. I think the incidence of that is a lot higher than among your kind of, for example, marketing executives or HR professionals.
Yeah, and even just people who work in IT generally. My current co-worker, who shares my office, he already had two wide screens. Actually, he recently switched to one that's just very wide and a high performance tower, and he just had already a nice setup, and he's an IT admin. But yeah, I mean, marketing executives, the thing is that it's a bit horses for courses, isn't it? If you are a marketing exec or sales or any other part of the marketing mix, if you like, and you are out on the road, then what you're going to need day to day is a slimline MacBook, or other laptops are available that you can use either on site with a client or in a cafe or whatever, or at home. So, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to not have some kind of, nice setup is what I'd call mine, or fancy, which is what I call yours.
I think you are entirely right in that the hardware that you need depends hugely on the job that you're doing. For example, historically, a lot of people have been very down on Chromebooks. Usually people, within IT who, scoff at the perceived lack of app compatibility and the supposed low power. But as you say, if you are, a marketing or sales professional, and basically all you need is a browser, an email client, and some, document editing suites, then a Chromebook is going to do you absolutely fine. And to boot is probably going to be quite light, relatively power efficient, and crucially quite cheap. Now, it's interesting that you say other laptops are available, because certainly towards the start of lockdown, other laptops kind of weren't available. We saw a lot of companies absolutely scrambling to pick up laptop stock to fit out their workforce with, who'd previously been working on desktop devices or on thin client solutions, which couldn't really be effectively taken home with staff.
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting shift to watch, as companies suddenly had to go, oh no, turns out our current hardware setup just is not flexible enough for what we need it to do.
Presumably you need something ruggedized as well, as deliveries turned from kind of hand something over and write on something to say delivered it to basically fling it at the door, and knock and run. But, well, I mean, it's interesting as well, because a friend of mine is a teacher, and actually she has an iPad, possibly an iPad Pro, and I believe it's her own device, I imagine, considering she works in state schools in the north of England. But that is ideal for her for marking students' work. And if you think about how teaching was when we were at school, and you're writing out on paper, and the teacher would leave you notes and stuff, that's effectively what she's doing now. Apparently her students are completely wowed that they're getting handwritten notes from her, because she's got a stylus. And whereas, for me, I have a tablet as well. I think tablets are really useful. They have actually kind of become like, you think that your laptop is portable? Well, check this out. And actually, it can also double up kind of as a laptop as well. My iPad is about 1,000 years old, and I only use it for playing podcasts because it's just not powerful to do anything else. And my husband keeps threatening to get rid of it. I'm like, no, it's fine. But that's for anybody who actually knows me, the frugal is probably one of the words that would be described for me. So, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's kind of like, well, it sort of works, so why would I need a new powerful, excellent thing? But perhaps anybody who's like me has kind of gone, oh, actually, if I'm going to work effectively on a more remote basis, then perhaps I do need something that can cope with more than just, Notepad.
Well, I think that's a very good point that you raised, because I think a lot of employees have previously been getting by with a machine that, maybe was a couple of years old, or, maybe even 5 or 6 years old in some cases, but wasn't too much of an issue when they were in the office because, they'd have it connected up to an external monitor, and it didn't matter so much that it was taking a bit longer to do things, and, couldn't multitask as well, because paradoxically, when we were in the office, we didn't have as much to do as we do now, particularly in tech roles or in tech adjacent fields. The pace of day-to-day work has sped up tremendously. We're being asked to do more and more things. It seems like we have even less time to do them in than we had pre-lockdown, despite the fact that none of us are commuting or anything. So the hardware is becoming more of a challenge, I think, for a lot of people to deal with than they were expecting. And I think a lot of people are now going, actually, I thought this was fine. I thought my laptop was good enough to do what I needed it to, but actually it's becoming a drain on my productivity.
We're going to take a short ad break now, but when we come back, we'll be talking about whether it's better to have one all-purpose device or a variety of different ones, and the merits of BYOD in a situation where most people are now working remotely.
See you after the break.
Welcome back. So we've spoken a bit about the different types of hardware that we might want to work with and what suits different people. But what is the difference then between a work device and a personal device? Is there a strong division there, do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting. Something that consistently surprises contacts in the world of PR when I talk to them is that journalists, by and large, do not have separate work phones and personal phones. So quite often, if if one gets a call out of hours, people are quite surprised if I tell them that actually no, I'm out for dinner or whatever. And I think in a lot of the business world, the idea of having a work phone and a personal phone is still quite entrenched. But the rise of cloud services has sort of blurred the lines between those devices to the point of meaninglessness. So most people will have their social media accounts and all of their emails going through to both devices just because it's generally more convenient that way. And I think at a certain point, those divisions start to break down. So what you end up with, essentially, is two devices which are basically used for essentially the same thing. The only real difference might be if one has the texts and the phone numbers that you use for personal contacts.
I think it also depends on what kind of business you're in and what their strategy is. Because as much as we like to talk about BYOD and stuff, bring your own device if you are not up on the parlance. Plenty of places still provision phones because, for example, they are they've got confidential IP or something like that. And so there has to be that separation. I mean, for us, yeah, it makes sense for us to be able to answer our phones in the middle of the night or whatever if we need to, because occasionally something really important happens when we're not on the clock. That's happened to me. I've had a crisis to deal with while I'm kind of walking down the road pushing a buggy, and it's super fun. But for say salespeople who are, or sales reps or something like that, they need a work phone, but that might have sensitive data on it, really. And they wouldn't need that out of hours. And it must be quite nice for them to be able to actually just switch it off when they're on holiday, or at the end of the day, whenever that may be. I wonder also, it did also used to be a bit of a status symbol. I think I may have mentioned that my old MD, when I very, very first started work, she had a BlackBerry, and nobody else in the company actually had a smartphone at all. And that was kind of like the status symbol for the person at the head of the company. I wonder if there's an element of that as well, that like maybe they will have the nicest, newest phone and everybody else has, I don't know, an iPhone 7 or an iPhone 8.
I actually think it's starting to go more the other way, where it's more of a status symbol not to have a work phone, as it were, and to have that distance and that ability to kind of switch off, when you are out of hours, or when you don't want to be contacted. I think it's becoming more of a status symbol to go, no, I am not working. I'm not going to have, I'm not going to have my work phone, or I'm going to be deleting all of my social media. I'm going to be, deleting my Slack app or Teams or whatever from my phone. I'm going to be deactivating my emails for a week, and I'm just not going to be available. And I have the luxury of doing that because I'm the boss.
Yeah.
I think that's becoming more of a trend, because it is. We've written about this multiple times on the site. Our colleague Bobby Hellard wrote an excellent column, I think, a couple of years ago on the dangers of nighttime slacking.
Yeah.
These cloud-enabled apps do make it very hard to effectively switch off. Whether you've got a work device or a personal device, realistically, you're probably going to have at least a couple of work communication apps on both of those devices. And it's very hard to get an actual functional separation of work device and personal device if that is the case.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny, we're talking about bring your own device here. The reality at the moment, we're not bringing our devices anywhere. Rather, we're either using our own devices that are in our houses or flats or whatever anyway, or whatever's been shipped to us in extreme haste at the end of March.
And I think this really kind of illustrates the dichotomy, if you like, between one kind of all-purpose device and a variety of perhaps slightly more specialized devices. I've seen on, social media, LinkedIn and Twitter and the like, people who have managed to perfect their home working setup in the sense of they do, let's say, their emails in the morning on a tablet device while they're having a cup of coffee in their garden, and then they move to their laptop in the dining room for the bulk of their day, doing the kind of more quote unquote intensive work, and then they will do the final portion of their day doing video calls and chats and stuff in a different part of the house, in the lounge, maybe off their phone, just to get a bit of variety, change up their working environment, what have you. But equally, I've seen people who just find their spot, and they just camp out there for the entire day with occasional tea breaks, and they don't really change devices, and they just they have everything that they need to do and all the capabilities that they need consolidated into one kind of big all-purpose Swiss Army knife of a machine.
I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that, because it also allows you, if I have the luxury of having a home office. Many people don't, but it does give you that ability to be kind of like, right, I've finished for the day. Even if it's sort of the left hand of your sofa, I've finished for the day. You get up, you close whatever device it is you're using or put it away, and then that's it. You've got some kind of delineation there, because I think that is really, really important, just kind of from a personal well-being point of view, to be able to kind of shut off. And I can see sort of having a dedicated spot, a dedicated device, whatever, as a way of facilitating that.
So after 9 months of home working, has this experience changed how you think about devices and hardware and how you use them at all?
That's a difficult question, actually. Yeah, do you know what? It has. And in the way that what was my primary work device, my laptop, which, I would use on my commute, I would use at work. If I was doing some work at home, typically I would use this as well. That's very much become my secondary device, because I already had this desktop in place that actually, frankly, I was wondering about getting rid of towards the end of last year. I was like, do I even need this? Yeah. So I think it's quite interesting that has become a secondary device, realistically, for work anyway. Other stuff hasn't changed at all. I still use my phone to check my email, to have a look on Slack. And I'm one of the people who's guilty, on a day off of having a peek on those. But slightly less, because I don't have the commute. I don't have sort of a couple of hours really of walking around and stuff that I need to check them. And I do have to, kind of be like, right, okay, put this down at the end of the day. But yeah, so I guess it has, but not in any kind of radical way. What about you?
So it's solidified a couple of things for me. I've always been a big proponent of using multiple monitors and external monitors. I wrote a column on this very subject about a month or so ago, which we will link in the show notes. And this whole working from home business has really solidified the fact for me that I do work best with at least one external monitor, ideally two. Well, ideally as many as I can get my hands on, frankly. There's a wonderful Terry Pratchett quote where somebody asked him why he used 6 monitors, and this was back in the late 90s, mind, when using multiple monitors was an exercise in networking frustration and cable management nightmares. But someone asked him, why do you use 6 monitors? And he said, because I haven't got room for 8. And that's very much my attitude. And going from multiple monitors and a very kind of customized, permanent, settled workspace to essentially just a single roaming laptop is challenging.
You make it sound like it's slightly autonomous and just making its way around your house. Come back.
Well, it does, but that's only because I forget where I've put it down.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for this week. Oh, very good, very good. But I'm sure this is a topic we'll be coming back to.
You can find more information on all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website, itpro.co.uk.
You can also follow us on social media or sign up to our daily newsletter for more great insights. And don't forget to leave us a rating and review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.